You can truly humiliate a woman only if you are certain she has no power. When my mother shoved a black catering jacket into my hands and hissed, "Do not speak unless spoken to," she thought she was hiding her embarrassment. She did not know I had spent the last 3 months auditing the Groom's family trust. By the time the champagne stopped sparkling, this engagement would not be the only thing falling apart. My name is Alice Hodges. I am 34 years old, and I arrived alone at the Ocean Breeze Estate in Palm Beach under the cover of a thick, humid Florida evening. The salt air clung to my modest navy sheath dress, a garment I had chosen specifically for its unremarkable nature. Tonight was the glittering engagement gala for my younger sister, Lauren, and her fiancé, Noah Wexler. Noah was the golden heir to the Wexler philanthropic empire, a family whose wealth was measured in generational influence, political leverage, and hundreds of millions of dollars. I parked my unassuming sedan 3 blocks away from the brilliant, chaotic glow of the valet line. I left my personal security detail. 2 highly trained professionals I strictly employ for my actual line of work, waiting out of sight at a discreet coffee shop downtown. I did this because I knew my mother, Janice, better than anyone else in the world. Janice cannot tolerate any disruption to the fictional reality she has spent her entire life meticulously constructing. Any sign that I had outgrown the pathetic, dependent, and low-status narrative she assigned to me years ago would be treated as an act of profound aggression. In her mind, I was still the failure of the family. I was the dull, unambitious cautionary tale she utilized to make Lauren shine brighter by comparison. I slipped through a heavy side entrance, navigating the narrow, fluorescent-lit service corridor that ran parallel to the grand ballroom. The heavy thumping of a live string quartet warming up vibrated through the plaster walls, mixing with the clatter of industrial kitchens. Before I could even reach the heavy velvet curtains separating the invisible staff from the high society guests, a sharp grip closed around my forearm like a vice. "What exactly do you think you are doing wearing that?" It was Janice. Her eyes darted aggressively up and down my plain dress, her mouth pinched into a familiar, deep line of pure disgust. She wore a heavy beaded gown that probably cost what she used to earn in 4 months back when we were struggling. Long before she hitched her wagon to Lauren's aggressive social climbing. "I am attending my sister's engagement party," I said, keeping my voice level and devoid of the emotional reaction she was hunting for. Janice pulled me violently deeper into the harsh light of the hallway, pulling us away from the passing waiters who kept their eyes glued to the floor. "Absolutely not. Do you have any idea who is out there right now? Donors, Alice, major foundation trustees, state politicians. The Wexlers have practically invited everything she owned to this room. And I am the bride's sister," I replied smoothly, holding my ground. "You are a walking embarrassment," she hissed, her manicured fingers digging deeper into my arm. "Lauren has worked far too hard to secure this match. She is stepping into a major, highly visible philanthropic role. She cannot afford to have you mingling with the Wexlers' inner circle, babbling about your awkward, low-level operations job. You do not fit in with these people. You do not know how to speak to these people. You will ruin the pristine image we have built." I let her toxic words wash over me. A much younger version of myself might have cried. A younger version might have screamed about the sheer cruelty of a mother actively erasing her eldest daughter to protect a financial and social grift. But I was not that vulnerable girl anymore. My daily life was heavily steeped in complex corporate betrayals, massive financial disputes, and the quiet, methodical destruction of fraudulent corporate empires. Janice's petty family politics and desperate social climbing were nothing compared to the ruthless boardroom wars I orchestrated on a daily basis. Janice turned sharply, reached over to a nearby laundry cart, and snatched a black catering jacket and a matching stiff apron. She shoved them hard into my chest. "If you insist on being in this building tonight, you will make yourself useful," she commanded, her voice dropping to a venomous, tight whisper. "Put these on immediately. You will work the room instead of attending as family. You will serve the champagne. You will clear the dirty plates. You are not to speak to a single guest unless they directly speak to you first, and if anyone asks, you are an agency hire. You are never, under any circumstances, to mention that you are Lauren's sister. Do you understand me? My initial, searing instinct was to drop the cheap polyester uniform onto the greasy linoleum floor, turn on my heel, and walk out into the warm night air. I did not need this abuse. I did not need them or their approval, but as Janice stood there, breathing heavily, convinced of her own absolute supremacy and my utter worthlessness, my eyes drifted over her rigid shoulder. Pinned to a large corkboard on the wall behind her was the master guest list for the evening. My eyes quickly scanned the bolded names assigned to the premium VIP tables. A cold, sharp clarity instantly crystallized in my chest, freezing my anger into pure focus. Several names on that board belonged to individuals deeply tied to a confidential, high-stakes professional investigation I had been handling for the past 4 months. They were powerful corporate trustees. They were foundation compliance consultants. They were the exact targets of my current fraud inquiry. This was not just an engagement party. This was an ecosystem of power, corporate deception, and stolen wealth, all gathered in one single room, unaware of who I truly was. That realization made me pause instead of walking out. The familiar sting of family rejection evaporated, replaced by the icy, calculating precision of my profession. If I walked out that door, I was just a rejected, heartbroken daughter running away from a bully. If I stayed and put on the uniform, I became a ghost in the machine. "Fine," I said softly. Janice looked momentarily taken aback by my complete lack of resistance, but her smug, maternal satisfaction quickly returned to her face. "Good. See that you do not mess this up. Lauren's entire future depends on tonight going flawlessly." She turned sharply and disappeared through the heavy velvet curtains, leaving me alone in the sterile, echoing corridor. I did not explode. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I calmly stripped off my navy dress. I folded it with meticulous, slow care, making sure the creases were aligned, and placed it safely inside my leather tote bag. I slipped my arms into the cheap, stiff black catering jacket. I tied the apron tightly around my waist. I pulled my hair back into a severe, invisible knot at the nape of my neck. As I smoothed the rough fabric of the uniform, I made a silent, ironclad vow. I decided right then and there to let this glittering evening reveal exactly what kind of people my mother, my sister, and my future brother-in-law really were when they believed no one important was watching them. I picked up a heavy silver tray laden with crystal champagne flutes from a prep table and pushed my way through the heavy swinging doors. The grand ballroom was an immediate sensory overload of extreme wealth. Enormous crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceilings, casting a golden, fractured light over a moving sea of designer gowns and sharply tailored tuxedos. The heavy scent of expensive perfume and imported white orchids hung thick in the air. I kept my head bowed just enough to play the part of the hired help, but my eyes missed nothing. Across the massive room, standing directly beneath the largest chandelier, was Lauren. She was glittering. She wore a custom silk gown that caught the golden light with her every calculated, practiced movement. She was performing absolute perfection for the room, throwing her head back in staged laughter, touching the forearms of elderly donors with exactly the right amount of manufactured warmth. Beside her stood Noah Wexler, swirling amber liquid in an expensive lowball glass, basking in his easy, unearned entitlement. He looked exactly like a man who had never been told no in his entire 32 years of life. I drifted slowly through the dense crowd, offering drinks with a silent nod, allowing myself to be erased by the powerful people around me. They looked right through my body. To these wealthy guests, I was not a human being. I was simply a delivery mechanism for alcohol. I was a piece of the moving furniture. I watched Lauren lean in to whisper something to Noah, a sly, conspiratorial smile playing on her painted lips. I watched Janice hover desperately near the Wexler family patriarchs, nodding vigorously at whatever mundane, arrogant observations they made. They were all so confident in their deception. They were so incredibly sure that their carefully constructed facade of philanthropic grace and high society belonging was impenetrable. They thought they had neutralized my existence by putting a serving tray in my hands. They thought they had successfully stripped me of my voice and my dignity. But as I moved silently through the ballroom, mentally cataloging the faces of the fraudulent corporate players and the vain, desperate social climbers, a profound sense of deadly calm washed over my entire body. I silently committed to staying in this room until the very last mask slipped off their faces. I would serve their expensive drinks. I would clear their dirty napkins. I would listen to their unguarded, arrogant conversations. For the first time in my life, standing in the dark shadow of my family's relentless, toxic ambition, humiliation was no longer a wound for me. It was evidence, and I was about to collect every single piece of it. I circulated through the cavernous ballroom, balancing a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes and delicate truffle canapes. The physical act of serving in a room dripping with wealth possesses a highly specific, layered cruelty. To the billionaires, politicians, and socialites mingling under the vaulted ceilings, I was devoid of humanity. I was treated as a mobile piece of furniture, a convenient mechanism for delivering alcohol and removing soiled napkins. Wealthy guests possessed a remarkable ability to slide their gaze through my body. They would reach for a flute of vintage champagne without ever making eye contact, continuing their conversations about offshore tax havens and private aviation, as if I were nothing more than a ghost haunting the perimeter of their reality. I moved silently toward the center of the room, where the acoustic dynamics allowed me to clearly hear the conversations bouncing off the marble pillars. Lauren had positioned herself strategically near the sweeping grand staircase, ensuring she was the absolute focal point for anyone entering the main hall. She was speaking loudly, her voice expertly modulated to sound passionate, yet appropriately restrained for high society. "We are scaling the foundation so rapidly," Lauren told a circle of deeply tanned, older men wearing custom tuxedos. "When I founded Brightpath Girls Lab, my singular vision was to bridge the technological divide for underprivileged young women. We are fundamentally changing the landscape of early science and mathematics education. In just 18 months, we have transformed how these girls envision their futures." She framed herself flawlessly as a polished, visionary future philanthropic leader. She hit every required buzzword with practiced ease, projecting an aura of effortless grace and deep moral conviction. Standing just half a step behind her right shoulder was Janice, reinforcing every single fabricated claim with beaming maternal pride. "Lauren has always possessed such a remarkably generous spirit," Janice chimed in, pressing her hand dramatically over her heart. "Even as a child, she was constantly thinking of how to elevate others. Seeing her step into this massive responsibility with the Wexler Family Foundation is simply the natural evolution of her beautiful soul." The sheer audacity of the performance was breathtaking. I kept my face blank, carefully collecting empty glasses from a nearby cocktail table. Moments later, I found myself drifting toward the mahogany bar area, where Noah Wexler was holding court with a group of his former fraternity brothers and junior investment bankers. He was on his third glass of scotch, his posture loose and arrogantly relaxed. As I stepped past his group to clear a discarded plate, Noah did not bother to turn his head. He simply raised his right hand and snapped his fingers sharply in the air next to my ear. "Get a fresh round over here, will you?" Noah commanded, his tone dripping with the casual irritation of a man unaccustomed to waiting for anything. He still had not bothered to look at my face. "And tell the kitchen to speed up the hot hors d'oeuvres. The service tonight is moving at a glacial pace." I paused for a fraction of a second, lowering my tray slightly. "Right away, sir," I replied softly, my voice neutral. Noah turned back to his friends, chuckling as he adjusted his expensive silk tie. "You would think for what my mother is paying this agency, they could find people who know how to hustle. Staff should really learn to stay invisible at serious events." He revealed his entire hollow character in that single dismissive line. He was a man who measured his own worth by how small he could make the people serving him feel. I gave a small, polite nod to his broad back and walked away. filing that interaction away in my mind. As I navigated toward the eastern wing of the ballroom, I found myself walking directly behind a lush floral arrangement where Janice had cornered a woman draped in heavy emerald jewelry. I recognized the woman immediately from my briefing files. She was the wife of a major donor whose family controlled a massive logistics empire. "The engagement is just thrilling," the donor's wife said, sipping her champagne. "But tell me, Janice, does Lauren have any siblings to share the excitement with? I only ever see the two of you in the society pages." Janice let out a long, calibrated sigh. It was the exact sound of a brave mother bearing an unspeakable, tragic burden. "Lauren does have an older sister," Janice said, lowering her voice into a tone of conspiratorial intimacy. "But she is a deeply difficult relative with incredibly unstable habits. She has always struggled to find her footing in the real world. We felt it was the wisest, most compassionate choice to keep her away from the main guest list tonight, just to avoid any unpredictable unpleasantness. We did not want her casting a shadow over Lauren's perfect evening." Unstable habits. The words hung in the air. A beautiful, poisonous lie. I tightened my grip on the edges of my silver tray until my knuckles turned white. But I did not stop walking. I moved to the elevated terrace overlooking the dance floor, giving myself a comprehensive vantage point of the entire gala. The deeper I looked into the crowd, the more the true nature of the evening revealed itself. I began scanning the faces, matching them to the extensive dossiers I had memorized over the past 90 days. Standing near the ice sculpture was the Wexler family's general counsel, a notoriously ruthless attorney known for dismantling corporate rivals with surgical precision. Near the balcony doors stood the chief financial officer of the Wexler Trust, nursing a mineral water and watching the crowd with the calculating eyes of an auditor. Sitting together at a premium corner table were two outside trustees from the foundation board, men who held the power to veto any financial restructuring within the family. This was not a party. Lauren and Janice believed they were hosting a glamorous celebration of love and upward mobility, but they were blind to the corporate reality of the room. The presence of these specific executives told me everything I needed to know. This gala was an unofficial, high-stakes character review. The Wexler Empire was not merely welcoming a new daughter-in-law, they were actively auditing an acquisition. The danger in the room was far more potent than my sister could possibly comprehend. I spotted a local society columnist hovering near the dessert station, her eyes darting aggressively as she mentally recorded the guest interactions. More alarmingly, I recognized a senior foundation compliance consultant speaking quietly with a major donor who had flown in specifically from Atlanta. These were people whose entire careers were built on identifying liabilities, mitigating public relations disasters, and sniffing out institutional rot. If they sensed even a fraction of the deception Lauren was selling, they would burn her social standing to the ground before the wedding invitations were even printed. I carried my tray down the side corridor, stepping into a brightly lit alcove that had been transformed into a gallery celebrating Lauren's supposed philanthropic achievements. Large, custom-framed displays stood proudly under angled halogen spotlights. I stopped in front of the largest board, pretending to adjust a stack of cocktail napkins on a nearby table while I studied the glossy materials. The posters were a masterpiece of fabricated corporate marketing. They featured highly edited photographs of Lauren handing out achievement certificates to smiling teenagers. They displayed bold, colorful graphs, charting the explosive geographical growth of the Bright Path Girls Lab chapters across 3 different states. They proudly listed a wall of corporate sponsors and advisory board members. But as I read the fine print, the cold, undeniable truth stared back at me. I looked at a photograph claiming to be a technology boot camp hosted in a downtown community center last November. I knew for an absolute fact, based on the confidential banking records I had subpoenaed 2 weeks ago, that the rental invoice for that exact community center had been canceled due to non-payment. I looked at the listed names of the supposed advisory board members. 3 of those individuals had already confirmed to my investigators that they had never heard of Lauren Hodges or her charity, and that their names had been attached to the promotional materials without their consent. I looked at the graphs claiming the distribution of 2,000 laptop computers. The vendor receipts hidden in a deleted server folder proved the charity had purchased exactly 0 devices. Several details on those glittering, expensive displays matched the exact financial discrepancies and fraudulent claims I had meticulously documented in my confidential investigation. They were broadcasting their crimes on poster board for the wealthiest families in Florida to admire. I took a slow, deep breath, the scent of expensive lilies filling my lungs. The gala stopped feeling like a petty, personal family insult. The sting of being shoved into a catering uniform evaporated. As I looked back out over the ballroom, watching my sister laugh and my mother preen, the entire evening transformed into a live, fully funded demonstration of blatant fraud, empty vanity, and endless social hunger, all arranged under the most beautiful lighting money could buy. As I stood in the shadow of the massive floral arrangements, the heavy silver tray resting securely against my hip, I allowed my mind to retreat into the cold, pristine architecture of my actual life. My mother and sister looked at me and saw a failure, a woman they successfully pushed out of the family home when I was just 19 years old. Janice had packed my meager belongings into thin plastic bags and locked the front door, convinced I would simply fade into a miserable, low-income obscurity. She believed she had permanently secured Lauren's place as the sole, shining focus of the family narrative. I was meant to be the dark, silent background against which Lauren's manufactured brilliance could shine. She was incredibly wrong. Being exiled at 19 did not destroy me. It clarified my entire existence. Stripped of familial support and forced to navigate a hostile, unforgiving world, I did not seek pity or forgiveness. Instead, I built Meridian Quiet Risk. I forged a high-end investigative compliance firm from the ground up, dedicating every single waking hour to mastering the intricate, invisible architecture of corporate and philanthropic wealth. I specialized in the exact things these wealthy, untouchable people feared most: massive donor fraud, catastrophic governance failures, and fatal reputation crises. My firm began humbly enough. During my early 20s, I spent my days ruthlessly auditing inflated hospitality vendors and tearing apart the complex tax filings of mid-tier private foundations. I learned how money moves when people are trying to hide it. I possessed a rare, surgical talent for identifying the specific, tiny lie that held an entire fraudulent corporate structure together. Word of my absolute discretion and brutal precision spread rapidly through private wealth channels. Meridian Quiet Risk quickly grew into the trusted outside investigator that ultra-wealthy families hired when their own inner circle could no longer be trusted. I became the apex predator of the boardroom. When a prestigious family office realized their general counsel was compromised, or when a board of directors suspected their chief financial officer was skimming millions, they did not call the federal authorities. They called me. That was precisely why Evelyn Wexler found me. 3 months earlier, long before the custom silk invitations for this engagement gala were ever printed, Evelyn reached out to my firm through a heavily encrypted, intermediary legal channel. Evelyn was the true, terrifying power behind the Wexler name. Her late husband might have built the financial empire, but Evelyn was the ruthless, calculating architect of its continued survival. She did not suffer fools, she did not tolerate liabilities, and she did not trust coincidence. Evelyn quietly hired me to perform a comprehensive, independent review of her grandson's chosen bride. The stakes were astronomical, even for a family of their immense stature. Evelyn was preparing to release control of a massive family trust valued at $280 million. This trust was a vital financial vehicle that was directly tied to Noah's future executive role within the family foundation. Before she handed over more than $250 million in voting power and liquid assets, she demanded the unvarnished, documented truth. She needed to know exactly who Lauren Hodges was, and she knew her own internal advisors were too intimidated by Noah to dig deep enough. For the past 90 days, my team of forensic accountants and former federal investigators had dismantled Lauren's pristine public image. I had tracked every single dollar, scrutinized every press release, and cross-referenced every tax filing. What I discovered was a masterpiece of empty corporate theater. Lauren's highly publicized reputation as a charitable rising star rested on a hollow, fraudulent nonprofit called Bright Path Girls Lab. The organization existed almost exclusively on paper, fueled by aggressive social media campaigns and heavily staged, emotionally manipulative photo operations. When I finally pierced the corporate veil and subpoenaed the actual banking records, the sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. I found dozens of erratic, unexplained money transfers routed through anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware. I found heavily padded donor claims designed to artificially inflate the charity's perceived market value to outside observers. There were hundreds of highly suspicious reimbursements for luxury travel, designer clothing, and elite dining, all illegally disguised as operational outreach expenses. Worst of all, we uncovered official board minutes that appeared to have been fabricated after the fact. They had forged signatures and backdated legal documents to make the disorganized, fraudulent operation look like a legitimate, legally compliant entity to outside investors. But the fake charity was only one piece of the massive puzzle. The most disturbing revelations centered on the Wexler family itself. I had to understand why a dynasty as ruthlessly guarded as the Wexlers was suddenly warming to a woman with no real pedigree and a deeply flawed nonprofit. The answer lay buried in a sealed internal file I managed to extract from a compromised Foundation server. The fake charity profile was central to the engagement because Noah desperately needed a polished, highly visible, philanthropic fiancé. Noah Wexler was not the golden heir he pretended to be while sipping scotch across the ballroom. 2 years earlier, he had been quietly implicated in a severe scandal inside the family foundation. It was a toxic mess involving mismanaged funds and a catastrophic power struggle that nearly fractured the board of trustees permanently. The incident was buried using aggressive non-disclosure agreements, but Noah's internal reputation was severely damaged. He needed Lauren. He needed her pristine, saintly public image to help repair his own standing among the older, more conservative trustees. Lauren was not a partner to him. She was a calculated public relations strategy. She provided the perfect, innocent cover story to legitimize his ascension to the head of the trust. It was a merger of mutual use and profound moral bankruptcy. He provided the immense wealth and the powerful name, and she provided the necessary illusion of moral purity. I had compiled every wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every manipulated document into a comprehensive, devastating final dossier. The trap was fully set, and the evidence was irrefutable. Yet, for the past week, I had intentionally delayed filing my final report with Evelyn Wexler. I held it back because one critical, unquantifiable question remained unanswered in my mind. I needed to know the true, unfiltered nature of their intent. Were Lauren and Janice merely shallow, desperate social climbers who had gotten in way over their heads in a desperate bid for wealth and acceptance? Or were they genuinely malicious actors? Were they willing to actively weaponize cruelty and deception when placed under pressure? I needed to see their true character, unfiltered by public relations spin and legal defense strategies. I needed to know if my family was simply pathetic, or if they were truly dangerous. I got my answer tonight. The instant Janice intercepted me in that harsh, fluorescent-lit service corridor, the final piece of the puzzle locked firmly into place. When she violently shoved that black catering jacket into my chest and ordered me to erase my own identity to protect her lies, I received the final live test I did not even know I needed. They were not victims of their own unchecked ambition. They were active, willing predators who would gladly sacrifice my humanity, my voice, and my dignity to secure their own unearned power. As I adjusted the stiff collar of my cheap uniform and prepared to walk back out into the glittering crowd to serve them another round of drinks, a deep, resonant satisfaction settled into my bones. The investigation phase was officially closed. The execution was about to begin. I moved through the sea of silk and tailored wool. My heavy silver tray balanced lightly on my fingertips. With every single lap I made around the perimeter of the grand ballroom, I could practically feel the physical tension leaving Janice and Lauren's shoulders. They watched me clear empty highball glasses and sweep away discarded, damp cocktail napkins. With each passing minute, their initial anxiety mutated into a toxic, glowing arrogance. They truly believed I had surrendered and accepted my humiliating demotion. They thought the cheap, stiff polyester of my catering uniform had successfully bound and gagged the dangerous woman I had become. In their minds, I was a ghost they had successfully exorcised right in the middle of their grandest, most public triumph. I was passing near the imported marble bar when Noah Wexler decided the natural volume of the room was not paying him enough focused attention. He was surrounded by a tight cluster of junior partners from a prominent private equity firm. Young men in sharp suits who laughed just a fraction of a second too quickly at his dull jokes. As I stepped within a few feet of his circle to clear a nearby table, Noah deliberately tipped his heavy crystal tumbler. A wide splash of expensive amber bourbon splashed across the polished parquet floor, pooling dangerously close to the hem of a woman's designer gown. He did not even attempt to pretend it was a clumsy accident. He looked directly at my plain black apron, snapped his fingers loudly, and pointed down at the spreading puddle. "You!" Noah barked, his voice carrying clearly over the gentle music of the string quartet. "Clean that up before someone slips and breaks an ankle, and be quick about it." He did not need my help. There were designated floor staff assigned specifically to environmental spills, and a thick, clean bar towel was sitting exactly 3 feet away from his own right hand. He issued the harsh command simply because publicly demonstrating his absolute authority over a nameless servant made him feel infinitely larger in front of his wealthy peers. I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply offered a blank nod, knelt gracefully onto the hard wooden floor, and wiped up the spilled liquor with a thick cloth. I could feel the heat of his smug, unearned satisfaction radiating downward, but it meant nothing to me. I was gathering critical data, and his towering arrogance was the most crucial variable of the entire night. 30 minutes later, the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against crystal echoed through the massive hall. Lauren stood positioned at the center of the grand staircase, beaming down at the assembled wealth of Palm Beach. The crowd quieted down, their faces turning upward toward the glowing, radiant bride-to-be. "I want to thank you all for being here with us tonight," Lauren began, her voice ringing out with practiced, breathy emotion. "Stepping into this incredible new chapter with Noah is a profound honor. But standing here, looking at the philanthropic leaders gathered in this magnificent room, I am deeply reminded of the immense family sacrifices it takes to build a lasting legacy." She let her eyes drift slowly over the crowd, intentionally avoiding the shadowy corner near the service doors where I stood holding a tray of miniature tarts. "My mother taught me the immense value of relentless drive," Lauren continued, her smile sharpening into something distinctly cold and cruel. "She taught me that lasting success requires a certain kind of polish, impeccable timing, and unyielding ambition. Some people simply never understand those traits. Some people in our lives are content to stay in the background, unable to rise to the occasion or handle the pressure of greatness. But we choose to aim higher. We choose to build a brighter path for those who need us." The applause was warm, sustained, and immediate. It was a flawless, incredibly subtle public execution. She was actively mocking the older sister she believed was too weak to fight back, framing my forced servitude as a personal, inherent failure of character. The applause had barely faded into the vaulted ceilings when Janice materialized right beside me. Her eyes were bright with a feverish, manic victory. She had heard every word of Lauren's toast, and the public validation had emboldened her beyond reason. She reached out and tapped the stiff shoulder of my black jacket with a sharp, manicured fingernail. "The dessert display on the south wall is looking hollow and pathetic," Janice commanded loudly, carefully ensuring the wealthy couples standing nearby could hear every single syllable. "Go to the lower kitchens, load a fresh cart of the lemon tartlets, and restock it immediately. Do not dawdle back there. Important people are waiting on you." She was practically vibrating with the dark, venomous joy of turning her own flesh and blood into a living prop for Lauren's fraudulent fairy tale. She wanted the room to see her commanding the hired help with the natural, dismissive ease of a born aristocrat. I lowered my head submissively, murmured a polite, quiet acknowledgement, and headed toward the dessert stations. Every petty order she barked was simply adding another thick, heavy brick to the massive wall I was about to drop directly onto their heads. As I methodically arranged the tiny pastries under the warm, golden display lights, I observed the actual mechanics of their massive fraud beginning to groan and strain under the heavy weight of reality. Stacked neatly on the edge of the dessert table were glossy, heavy-stock event booklets detailing Lauren's supposed charitable endeavors. I watched a tall man in a bespoke navy suit pick one up and flip directly to the centerfold, where a list of the charity's major foundational sponsors was printed in elegant silver text. I recognized his face immediately from my extensive research files. He was a prominent commercial real estate developer whose name was prominently listed right there on page 4. A moment later, Janice glided over and smoothly introduced him to another wealthy couple as one of Lauren's most generous and dedicated early supporters. The developer blinked repeatedly, a deep, heavy crease forming between his graying brows. He exchanged a highly confused, uncomfortable look with his wife. I could read his lips as Janice turned away to greet someone else by the champagne tower. "I wrote a check for a charity golf tournament 5 years ago," he muttered quietly to his wife, tapping the glossy booklet with a stiff finger. "I have never even heard of a girls' laboratory program." His wife frowned deeply, glancing nervously at the surrounding crowd of influential guests. "Keep your voice down," she whispered sharply. "We will ask our accountant to look into this on Monday morning." The structural fractures were not just isolated to confused, minor donors. Moving closer to the main dining area, I positioned myself near a towering floral arrangement just as one of the senior outside trustees cornered Noah's chief financial officer. The trustee was a formidable man, and he was holding a folded piece of thick paper he had just pulled from his breast pocket. "You need to explain this discrepancy to me right now," the trustee said quietly, his tone devoid of the party's festive, celebratory cheer. "I am looking at the printed annual summary for Lauren's charity right here in the Gala program. It explicitly claims they deployed over $200,000 in direct educational grants last quarter. But the private donor summary Noah circulated to the board 2 weeks ago states their total operating budget for the entire year was under $90,000. The chief financial officer shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting across the room toward Noah, who was oblivious and laughing loudly by the bar. "There must be a slight reporting lag," the executive replied smoothly, though a tight, anxious muscle jumped visibly in his jaw. "We are operating on different fiscal quarters. We can thoroughly review the ledger together on Tuesday." "You make sure that you do that," the trustee warned softly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Because right now, these numbers are bleeding heavily, and I do not attach my name to bleeding ships." I stood in the deep shadows of the floral arrangements, still, saying nothing. I was a human recording device, capturing every single micro-expression, every nervous twitch, and every whispered panic. I mentally recorded exactly who lied smoothly, like Noah's cornered financial officer. I recorded who hesitated and stumbled, like the confused real estate developer. I memorized who actively avoided specific details, like Janice dancing away from direct financial questions. And I noted exactly who was already growing deeply uneasy, like the powerful trustee folding his piece of paper back into his pocket. The glossy veneer was cracking. The structural integrity of their massive, coordinated lie was failing in real time, right in front of my eyes. Then, the entire atmosphere of the room dramatically shifted. It was not a sudden noise or a dramatic announcement, but rather a profound, collective drop in the room's atmospheric pressure. The lively string quartet abruptly softened their tempo, drawing their bows in a long, sustained, elegant chord that signaled a change in the evening's program. The chaotic, joyful hum of overlapping conversations began to die out rapidly, the silence rippling outward from the heavy double doors at the main entrance. The sheer volume of the gala dropped to a nervous, highly electric murmur. The wealthy guests naturally began to part, taking synchronized steps backward to clear a wide, unobstructed path down the very center of the ballroom. They turned their heads, their postures straightening instinctively out of pure, conditioned respect. Evelyn Wexler had arrived. No one else in that glittering room understood the catastrophic, world-ending gravity of this exact moment. To the local politicians, the ambitious socialites, and the oblivious donors, it was merely the grand, expected entrance of the legendary family matriarch. To Lauren and Janice, stepping forward with bright, eager smiles, it was the final glorious validation of their successful societal infiltration. But as I stood alone, tightly clutching my silver tray, feeling the volatile, charged energy replacing the glamorous facade, I knew the absolute truth. The executioner had just walked into the room, and I was the only person holding the blade. Evelyn Wexler did not require a grand announcement or a heavy-handed introduction. She possessed the kind of quiet, gravitational authority that forced the physical world to adjust to her, rather than the other way around. She stepped through the heavy mahogany doors wearing a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal gown, devoid of excessive jewels or dramatic embellishments. Her silver hair was pulled back sharply, and her posture was a masterclass in absolute control. The entire space of the ballroom immediately reorganized itself around her presence. The loud, boisterous laughter from the younger executives died in their throats. The string quartet naturally softened their instruments to a deferential, barely audible hum. The wealthy donors and influential politicians instinctively parted, creating a wide, unobstructed runway straight down the center of the polished parquet floor. Janice, desperate to capitalize on the entrance, practically sprinted forward. She dragged Lauren aggressively by the elbow, with Noah trailing confidently just a half step behind them. They moved as a coordinated unit, a carefully rehearsed formation designed specifically to project an impenetrable image of elegance, high pedigree, and seamless family compatibility. Janice arranged her face into a tight mask of pure, deferential joy. "Evelyn, we are so incredibly thrilled you have arrived," Janice gushed, her voice pitching slightly too high in her eagerness. "The evening simply could not begin in earnest without you. Lauren has been vibrating with anticipation to formally welcome you." Lauren nodded rapidly, clasping her hands together in a gesture of practiced humility. "Thank you so much for everything. Evelyn, tonight is truly a dream." Noah stepped up, beaming with the easy arrogance of a favored grandson. "Grandmother, you look wonderful. Let me get you a drink." This was my absolute cue. Earlier, my mother had explicitly ordered me to work the room and serve the most important guests. I was simply following the strict, humiliating parameters she had established for my existence. I stepped smoothly out from the deep shadow of the towering floral arrangement, my heavy silver tray balanced on my right hand. I kept my eyes respectfully lowered, matching the posture of every other invisible hired servant in the building. I moved directly into the center of the tight, powerful circle they had formed. I extended the tray toward the Wexler matriarch. "Would you care for a glass of champagne, madame?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and professionally subservient. Janice immediately stiffened. A sharp, lethal flash of panic darted across her eyes. She clearly had not anticipated me moving directly into Evelyn's orbit, but she was trapped by the rigid social etiquette of the moment. She could not scream at a waitress in front of the woman who held the absolute keys to the kingdom. She forced a tight, agonizing smile, silently praying I would simply fade back into the wallpaper. Evelyn Wexler did not reach for a crystal flute. Instead, her sharp, calculating eyes dropped down to the cheap, stiff fabric of my black catering jacket. She took in the plain apron, the stark contrast of the uniform against the opulent surroundings. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she raised her gaze to look directly into my face. I did not avert my eyes. I met her intense stare with complete, unblinking calm. The color instantly drained from Evelyn's cheeks. The formidable, untouchable matriarch of the Wexler Empire actually took a half step backward, her composure fracturing in real time. Her eyes widened, processing the impossible visual contradiction standing right in front of her. She recognized me immediately. We had spent hours sitting across from each other in highly secure, confidential boardrooms over the past 3 months. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew exactly what I was capable of destroying. The heavy, oppressive silence of the ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the center of the room, watching the strange, frozen tableau. "Alice," Evelyn whispered. Her voice was not loud, but in the deadened quiet of the hall, it carried like a physical blow. She did not say my name like a guest addressing a servant. She said it with immediate, undeniable respect. Janice let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle that sounded like tearing metal. "Oh, Evelyn, please do not worry about the staff. They are just from the agency." Evelyn ignored Janice. She stepped closer to me, her sharp eyes scanning my face for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate, cruel joke. "Alice Hodges, why in the name of God are you wearing a catering uniform?" Evelyn demanded, her voice hardening into a blade of pure authority. She turned her fierce gaze toward her grandson, then back to me. "The independent investigator holding the final decision over the future of a $280 million trust does not carry drinks at an engagement gala. What is the meaning of this?" The room did not just freeze, it practically shattered. The atmospheric pressure plummeted to absolute zero. Every single conversation, every clinking glass, every whispered transaction ceased instantly. In one single, devastating sentence, Evelyn Wexler had taken the invisible, mocked servant, and violently transformed her into the single most consequential human being in the entire building. The class hierarchy of the evening was inverted in a fraction of a second. The wealthy donors, the politicians, and the trustees stared at me with sudden, terrifying clarity. I was no longer a piece of furniture. I was the executioner. Noah broke the silence with a loud, hollow laugh. He ran a hand through his styled hair, shaking his head at what he assumed was a bizarre case of mistaken identity. "Grandmother, you must be confused," Noah chuckled, a nervous edge bleeding rapidly into his confident facade. "She is just one of the caterers. I had her cleaning up a spilled drink off the floor 20 minutes ago. She is nobody. She is certainly not nobody." "Noah," a deep, resonant voice cut through the dense crowd. The Wexler family's general counsel, the ruthless attorney I had spotted earlier near the ice sculpture, stepped decisively out of the crowd and into the center circle. He did not look at Noah. He did not look at Lauren. He walked directly up to me, stopped a respectful distance away, and gave a sharp, highly formal nod. "Good evening, Ms. Hodges," the general counsel said, his tone laced with heavy professional deference. "I was not informed you would be conducting your final field assessment in person tonight. Has your team concluded the audit?" "Good evening, counselor," I replied evenly, ignoring the tray still resting firmly on my hand. "The audit is complete. The final report is finalized." Noah's laugh died instantly in his throat. The smug, arrogant certainty washed right off his face, replaced by a pale, creeping horror. He looked at the general counsel, then at his grandmother, and finally at me. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him like a collapsing building. The woman he had just ordered around like a stray dog was the exact same woman who held his entire financial future inside a sealed folder. Lauren was hyperventilating, her manicured hands gripping the silk fabric of her expensive gown so tightly her knuckles were white. She stared at me as if I had just crawled out of a grave. She could not comprehend how the sister she had spent a lifetime degrading had somehow ascended to a position of supreme, untouchable authority over the very people she worshipped. Janice, however, was operating on pure, desperate survival instinct. She lunged forward, physically inserting herself between Evelyn and me. Her face was a horrific mask of panicked, stretching smiles. "Evelyn, counselor, please, this is all just a terrible, silly family misunderstanding," Janice babbled, her words spilling out in a frantic, unstructured rush. "Alice is my eldest daughter. She has always been incredibly dramatic, always playing little pranks and seeking attention. She clearly thought it would be amusing to dress up and surprise us tonight. We are just so embarrassed by her lack of decorum. Please, let us just go into the private dining room and fix this. A misunderstanding, Evelyn interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that made Janice flinch physically. Janice, you are telling me that the forensic auditor I personally hired to investigate the structural integrity of your daughter's charitable foundation is your own flesh and blood? Janice nodded rapidly, tears of absolute panic welling in her eyes. Yes, but she is unstable. Evelyn, she is jealous of Lauren. You cannot possibly trust anything she has written. She is trying to ruin this beautiful night out of pure spite. She does not need to ruin anything, Evelyn stated coldly, her eyes fixed firmly on my mother with absolute disgust. She is the most highly respected compliance investigator on the Eastern Seaboard, and you put her in an apron. The damage was complete and irreversible. The carefully constructed illusion of high society grace that Janice and Lauren had spent years building was pulverized in front of the very people they desperately needed to impress. The major donors from Atlanta were already whispering fiercely to their spouses. The compliance consultants were pulling out their phones. The local society columnist was staring at us with wide, predatory eyes. They all understood exactly what had just happened. This was no longer an engagement celebration. The glittering facade had been violently ripped away, exposing the ugly, desperate rot underneath. The class hierarchy of the entire night had shattered into a million jagged pieces, and I stood untouched in the center of the wreckage. I turned slightly and placed the heavy silver tray onto a nearby marble side table. The crystal flutes chimed softly as they settled, the only sound in a room that had gone breathless. I folded my hands together, resting them against the coarse fabric of my black apron, and addressed the matriarch directly. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. The acoustics of the vaulted ceiling and the absolute, terrified silence of the crowd carried my words. I was retained to complete an independent due diligence assessment, I stated clearly, looking directly into Evelyn Wexler's severe, assessing eyes. The scope of my mandate was to evaluate the structural, legal, and reputational integrity of the proposed marital alliance before Noah receives his permanent family trust authority and his promised seat on the foundation board. Janice let out a strangled gasp, but I did not afford her a single glance. Over the past 90 days, my team has identified significant, highly actionable concerns surrounding the operational legitimacy of Bright Path Girls Lab, I continued, adopting the exact cadence I used when briefing federal prosecutors. These concerns are not minor administrative oversights. They include massively inflated donor rolls, hundreds of thousands of dollars in missing restricted funds, fabricated advisory board listings, and wildly inconsistent state and federal tax filings. Lies, Janice shrieked. The manicured, high society mother had vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. She pointed a trembling finger at my face, stepping aggressively forward until Noah had to physically grab her arm to restrain her. You are listening to the jealous delusions of a bitter, resentful woman. She has hated her sister since they were children. She is doing this for revenge. She wants to sabotage a beautiful, happy event out of pure, venomous personal resentment because she has nothing of her own. Lauren began to sob softly, a highly rehearsed, delicate weeping designed to elicit maximum sympathy from the surrounding older gentlemen. "Why are you doing this?" Lauren cried out, pressing her face against Noah's shoulder. "I only ever wanted to help those poor girls." I did not flinch at the emotional theatrics. In my line of work, tears were just another form of currency, and theirs was counterfeit. A jealous sibling could not invent the exact discrepancies currently sitting in the forensic ledger, I countered smoothly, shifting my gaze away from Evelyn to pan across the shocked faces of the Wexler family's legal and financial advisors. For instance, let us discuss the primary academic initiative. You heavily promoted a specialized scholarship fund designed to send underprivileged women to technical boot camps. Our audit confirms that exact fund never issued a single scholarship, not one. Yet, the external marketing claims you disbursed over $75,000 last year alone. The general counsel pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket, his face darkening with professional fury. "Go on, Ms. Hodges." "Furthermore," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Lauren's fabricated sobbing, "we uncovered multiple event invoices that were deliberately billed twice through two separate shell companies registered in Delaware. We also secured official board approval documents that authorize massive discretionary spending. The problem is that 3 of the core board members whose signatures appear on those documents were out of the state, or out of the country, on the exact dates listed next to their names." A sharp collective intake of breath rippled through the outer edges of the crowd. The wealthy guests who had been straining to hear the confrontation were rapidly connecting the dots. I watched the prominent commercial real estate developer, the man I had observed earlier, looking confused at his own listing, lean fiercely into the ear of the foundation compliance consultant standing beside him. "They used my name," the developer hissed loudly, abandoning any pretense of high society discretion. "They publicly cited my company as a primary corporate sponsor on that massive display board in the hallway. I wrote a single check for a golf fundraiser 5 years ago. I have never supported this laboratory program." His outrage acted as a catalyst. Whispers began to spread across the ballroom like a flash fire. Other donors pulled the glossy event booklets from their pockets, their eyes scanning the printed lists in sheer panic. They realized they were being publicly utilized to prop up a hollow, fraudulent structure they barely remembered hearing about. Noah realized the structural integrity of his entire future was disintegrating. He released Lauren and stepped forward, raising his hands in a desperate, defensive gesture. "Wait, everyone just needs to calm down and take a breath," Noah pleaded, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. He looked pleadingly at his grandmother. "The paperwork is just messy. Grandmother, that is all this is. The organization grew far too quickly. Lauren was overwhelmed by the explosive scale of the operation. We can hire a restructuring firm on Monday to clean up the ledgers. It is just administrative sloppy work, not a crime." Evelyn cut him off with a look so sharply cold it could have frozen boiling water. "Messy paperwork," she repeated, enunciating each syllable with lethal precision. "Noah, you are standing in front of the most powerful financial regulators and trustees in this state. Did you personally review a single page of this charity's financial history before you presented this woman to our family as a competent governance asset?" Noah opened his mouth, stammering, searching desperately for a strategic lie, but he was trapped. If he said yes, he was actively complicit in the massive fraud. If he said no, he admitted to gross, disqualifying negligence before taking over a trust worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He chose the path of a coward. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes and swallowed hard. "I trusted her," he muttered weakly. "You did not just trust her," I corrected him, pulling the final fatal pin from the grenade. "You actively packaged and sold her." I reached over to the edge of the marble table and picked up one of the glossy, heavily embossed Gala booklets that Janice had ordered me to restock earlier. I held it up so the heavy chandeliers illuminated the expensive silver lettering on the cover. "This printed booklet contains dozens of highly specific, fabricated financial claims regarding the reach and impact of BrightPath Girls Lab," I stated, my eyes locking directly onto the senior outside trustee who had been questioning the chief financial officer earlier. During the course of my investigation, I utilized a digital forensic sweep of the primary foundation servers. The false claims printed in this exact booklet were taken almost word for word from a highly confidential private donor memo. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure maximum impact. That specific memo was drafted, approved, and circulated to the Board of Trustees by Noah's own private office exactly 2 weeks ago. The absolute devastation that washed over the room was biblical. The Wexler chief financial officer actually closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, realizing the catastrophic legal liability that had just been unleashed. This was the exact moment the entire nature of the evening permanently mutated. The crisis immediately stopped being a petty, dramatic family disagreement about an unstable older sister. It ceased to be a simple case of an ambitious bride exaggerating her resume. It became a massive, highly public credibility collapse. It involved misappropriated money, fatal governance failures, and the total destruction of a legacy reputation. Most importantly, it destroyed the foundational judgment of the groom himself. Noah had attempted to smuggle a fraudulent asset into the heart of his family's empire to mask his own previous failures, and he had used the foundation's own official letterhead to do it. The room full of billionaires and power brokers no longer saw a golden heir. They saw a massive, walking liability who had just detonated a bomb inside their own vault. And they saw me, the woman in the cheap polyester uniform, holding the detonator. Evelyn Wexler did not raise her voice. She did not demand an explanation in front of the horrified ballroom. She simply turned her sharp gaze toward her general counsel and issued a single, quiet command that carried the absolute, undeniable weight of an execution order. She instructed the immediate family, her legal advisors, and me to move to the estate library immediately. We walked through the silent, staring crowd in a procession that felt distinctly like a funeral march. I kept the black catering apron tied tightly around my waist, an intentional, physical reminder of exactly how they had treated me just 1 hour earlier. As we crossed the threshold of the grand hallway, Evelyn ordered the heavy mahogany doors to be shut behind us, but left the secondary corridor doors slightly ajar. Because of this, the bright, joyful notes of the string quartet continued to drift into the room. The musicians were oblivious to the slaughter happening inside, keeping up a lively, elegant waltz. The chilling contrast between the public elegance of the gala and the private, claustrophobic destruction unfolding inside the library was deafening. The estate library was a massive, dimly lit sanctuary of dark oak paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and heavy leather furniture. The air smelled of aged scotch, old paper, and impending ruin. Once the heavy brass lock clicked shut, the oppressive reality of the room settled over us like a suffocating blanket. I stepped directly to the center of the room, standing beside a massive antique globe. Evelyn seated herself in a high-backed leather chair behind the primary desk, folding her hands on the polished wood. The general counsel stood rigidly by her right shoulder. Janice, Lauren, and Noah were clustered together near the unlit stone fireplace, looking like survivors of a shipwreck who had just realized the rescue boat was actually a predator. "The time for public relations spin has concluded," I began, my voice flat, surgical, and devoid of any familial warmth. The illusion of Bright Path Girls Lab was not an accidental exaggeration born of rapid, unmanageable growth. It was a deliberately manufactured corporate myth, engineered from its very inception to defraud donors and secure social leverage. I reached into the deep pocket of my apron and pulled out my encrypted mobile device, connecting it seamlessly to the large smart monitor mounted on the oak wall. "Let us examine the full chain of evidence," I said, projecting a series of highly detailed documents onto the screen. "We forensically analyzed the promotional materials your team distributed. The touching mentorship photographs used in your annual gala mailers were staged. You did not teach underprivileged young women how to code. You hired local commercial actors. I have the casting agency receipts on the screen right now, totaling $4,500, billed directly to a credit card registered in Janice's name." Lauren shrank backward, her shoulders trembling violently. She clamped her hands over her mouth, but I did not stop. "The video footage of your supposed chapter launches in 3 different regional cities was actually recycled, royalty-free background footage purchased from an online stock agency," I continued, swiping to the next slide, which displayed the digital purchase timestamps. "Furthermore, the prominent donor names listed on the Foundation's primary website were systematically scraped from public philanthropic databases and added without their consent or knowledge." Janice pressed her back against the cold stone of the fireplace, her face drained of blood. She looked terrified, but I knew the depths of her complicity required public exposure. "You were the chief architect of this psychological manipulation." "Mother," I stated, turning my gaze directly onto her trembling frame. "You coached Lauren before every single major donor meeting. You taught her how to weaponize false empathy. That is a lie, Janice whispered weakly, her voice cracking. I am just a supportive mother. During our data sweep, we recovered a cache of deleted audio files from Lauren's cloud storage, I countered smoothly, tapping the screen again. These files were recorded on her mobile phone during your private practice sessions. I did not need to play the audio out loud. Reading the exact, verified transcript was far more brutal. In a recording dated 42 days ago, you explicitly instructed Lauren on her vocal tone. I recited from memory, my eyes locked onto Janice's terrified face. You told her, and I quote, "Remember to tilt your head and lower your voice when you talk about their poverty. These rich old men love to feel like they are saving the world, but they do not want to look at actual ugly, desperate people. Make the girls sound pathetic, but keep the focus on your own beautiful, selfless sacrifice." End quote. Evelyn closed her eyes, a look of profound physical sickness washing over her sharp features. The general counsel scribbled furiously on his legal pad, his jaw clenched tight with professional disgust. The sheer emotional brutality of Janice privately mocking the very girls the charity claimed to help, while simultaneously exploiting their fictional suffering for wealth, was a sickening revelation. But the absolute largest blow was yet to land. I turned my attention away from my mother and sister, focusing my absolute authority on the golden heir standing near the window. Noah had his arms crossed defensively over his chest, desperately trying to project an aura of untouchable wealth. The most critical, fatal failure of governance in this room does not belong to the Hodges family, I stated, the rhythm of my words hitting like the final strikes of a gavel. It belongs to you, Noah. You knew Bright Path Girls Lab was hollow weeks ago. Noah's head snapped up, his eyes wide with sudden cornered panic. That is an absolute fabrication, he spat, his voice echoing sharply off the wood panels. I possess the encrypted email logs exchanged between your private server and your personal wealth manager, I countered, projecting the heavily redacted headers onto the screen. You discovered the massive financial anomalies exactly 21 days ago. Your manager warned you the charity was a massive liability, but you made a calculated, deliberate decision to proceed with the engagement anyway. You decided the deception was still highly useful to you. Noah stepped away from the window, his chest heaving. Grandmother, you have to understand, he pleaded, looking frantically at Evelyn. I did not let him control the narrative. Lauren's polished, saintly public profile was the exact, perfect shield you needed to stabilize your severely damaged standing with the Board of Trustees. I explained to the room, dismantling his entire psychological motive. Following your previous internal disciplinary issues regarding the mismanaged foundation funds last year, you needed a public redemption arc. Lauren provided it. You used her fraudulent charity to launder your own ruined reputation. Noah threw his hands up in a gesture of wild, desperate surrender. I was going to fix it, he shouted, his pristine composure totally shattered. I swear to you, Grandmother, I only intended to clean it up after the wedding. Once the trust authority was officially transferred, I was going to quietly hire a restructuring firm. I was going to pour my own capital into the charity to make the ledger legitimate. The framework was already there. It was just a strategic delay. He exposed his own fatal flaw in his defense. He proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he never actually cared whether the charitable deception was real, nor did he care about the ethical implications of the fraud, as long as it remained strategically useful to his own ascension to power. You did not just plan to delay the truth, I said, reaching into my pocket and withdrawing a sleek silver digital audio recorder. You actively attempted to corrupt the independent oversight. I pressed the play button. The crisp, clear audio of a male voice echoed off the leather-bound books. It was a high-end private intermediary, a man known for handling dirty problems for ultra-wealthy clients. The recording captured a conversation from exactly 5 days ago. The intermediary had approached Meridian Quiet Risk with a highly lucrative, deeply illegal offer. If your firm can see its way to significantly softening the final field report regarding Ms. Hodges, the recorded voice stated smoothly, the Wexler family office is prepared to guarantee Meridian Quiet Risk a minimum of $3 million in future consulting retainers over the next 5 years. We just need the rough edges sanded down before the trust review. I clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The intermediary was acting on your direct personal authorization. Noah, I said, stepping closer to him, forcing him to look at the cheap black apron tied around my waist. You tried to bribe my firm. You attempted to buy the absolute silence of the independent investigator to protect your fragile acquisition. Noah stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The catastrophic irony of the situation was finally penetrating his arrogant skull. And the most poetic part of this entire, pathetic tragedy, I whispered, my voice cold as ice, is that you never once realized you were attempting to bribe the exact same woman your fiancé's family treated as disposable, invisible labor. You tried to buy my professional integrity, and then you ordered me to clean up your spilled bourbon. Evelyn Wexler looked at her grandson. She looked at Lauren, who was weeping silently into her hands. She looked at Janice, who was staring blankly at the floor. In that exact instant, the legendary matriarch understood the absolute, horrifying truth. The problem sitting inside her beautiful estate was not just a messy engagement or a case of sloppy paperwork. It was a hostile merger between two distinct families, built on empty vanity, aggressive dishonesty, and a profound, toxic contempt for everyone they considered beneath them. The heavy silence in the library was broken by the sharp, desperate sound of my mother's voice. Janice pushed herself away from the cold stone of the fireplace, her face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious indignation. You planned every single second of this, Janice hissed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. You set a trap for your own sister. You walked into this house tonight knowing exactly what you held in that folder, and you waited. No decent daughter would stay quiet long enough to humiliate her own family this thoroughly. You are a monster. You have always been a cold, unfeeling monster. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. The room was already suffocating under the heavy weight of her exposed lies. I did not set a trap. Mother, I simply allowed you to continue acting exactly as you always have. I gave you enough rope, and you eagerly tied the knot yourself. Lauren, sensing that anger was failing rapidly, immediately pivoted to victimhood. She crumpled into one of the heavy leather armchairs, burying her face in her hands. You abandoned us, Lauren sobbed, her voice muffled but pitched for maximum theatrical tragedy. She looked up, directing her tear-streaked face toward Evelyn and the general counsel. She left us when life got hard, when our father died and the debts piled up. She just packed her bags and vanished. She left me alone with a grieving mother. She abandoned this family, and now she comes back just to destroy the only good thing I have ever built. Evelyn Wexler watched the performance with the detached fascination of a scientist studying a parasite. She did not offer a single word of comfort. I did not abandon you, I replied, my tone remaining conversational. You pushed me out of the house when I was 19 years old because I refused to participate in the petty, desperate grifts you were running to maintain your country club memberships. You told me I was the family embarrassment. You told me I lacked the necessary polish to succeed. I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between myself and the armchair where my sister wept. But let us discuss my supposed abandonment, I continued, my eyes fixed firmly on Janice. Let us talk about the winter of 7 years ago. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the family home. The final notice was served on a Tuesday. By Friday morning, the entire principal balance of the mortgage, along with all accumulated late fees and penalties, was miraculously paid in full via an anonymous cashier's check. Janice froze. Her aggressive, defensive posture evaporated in an instant, replaced by a sudden, rigid terror. The total sum was $142,000, I stated, watching the remaining color drain from my mother's face. I wired that money through a blind trust established by my firm. I paid off the house so my younger sister would not have to sleep in a motel. I gave you a clean slate, asking for no credit and no gratitude. The general counsel leaned forward, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Evelyn remained still, her sharp eyes darting between my mother and me. But the banking records I subpoenaed last month told a very different, highly disturbing story, I said, my voice dropping to a surgical whisper. The mortgage was never actually paid off, was it, Mother? Janice squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head rapidly, but she could not stop the truth from flooding the room. You received the emergency funds, but you negotiated a temporary forbearance with the lender instead. I revealed, the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of her actions hanging heavy in the air. You took the bulk of that anonymous money, my money, and you redirected it. You used it to launch the polished, social brand version of Bright Path Girls Lab. You took the money meant to keep a roof over your head, and you bought designer wardrobes, hired a boutique public relations firm, and rented premium office space to construct Lauren's fake charitable profile. Lauren gasped, looking genuinely shocked for the first time all evening. She turned her wide, panicked eyes toward Janice. You told me an angel investor gave us that seed money. I gave you the world, Lauren, Janice snapped, her voice cracking with desperate, toxic maternal pride. I bought you a future. We needed to look the part to get in the door. You cannot climb the ladder if you look like you are starving. Lauren scrambled out of the heavy chair, her custom silk gown rustling loudly against the dark wood floor. She rushed over to Noah, grabbing his forearm with both hands. Noah, please, she begged, her voice trembling with genuine, uncalculated terror. You have to believe me. I never understood the finances. My mother handled all the banking. I just wanted to be the face of the movement. I just wanted to make you proud. Please, tell them I did not know. Noah Wexler looked down at the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 6 months. He did not see a partner. He saw a massive, radioactive liability. The deep, ingrained survival instincts of generational wealth overrode any lingering affection he might have possessed. He physically pried her fingers off his tailored suit jacket, stepping backward to create a clear, undeniable distance between them. Do not touch me, Noah said, his voice laced with pure revulsion. He was terrified. He was not frightened of losing his beautiful fiancée. He was paralyzed by the very real threat of losing his executive position, his trust fund access, and his standing within the Wexler empire. You lied to me. You lied to my family. You are a complete fraud. Lauren let out a shattered, guttural sob, collapsing back against the heavy wooden desk. Before the emotional wreckage could settle, the heavy oak doors to the library opened softly. A senior security officer stepped inside, followed closely by the estate's primary house staff supervisor. The general counsel had quietly messaged them instructions 15 minutes earlier. Excuse the interruption, madam, the general counsel said, turning respectfully to Evelyn. But I felt it was strictly necessary to definitively close the loop on Janice's earlier claim that the catering uniform was merely a playful family misunderstanding. The general counsel gestured to the nervous staff supervisor, a man who had worked for the Wexlers for 2 decades. Mr. Davies, could you please confirm the exact instructions you received regarding the catering staff this evening? The supervisor cleared his throat, actively avoiding eye contact with the sobbing bride. Yes, sir. Approximately 10 minutes before the primary guest arrivals, the mother of the bride approached me in the main staging kitchen. She specifically pointed out a young woman entering through the service corridor. She explicitly ordered me to remove that woman from the guest side of the event, stating she was a disgraced, unstable relative who was forbidden from speaking to the attendees. She demanded I issue her a standard service uniform and put her to work on the floor immediately. Janice opened her mouth to argue, but the security officer stepped forward, holding a sleek silver tablet. Furthermore, we reviewed the internal security feeds from the service corridors as you requested, the officer reported, his tone professional. He placed the tablet on the desk, turning the screen so Evelyn, Noah, and the legal team could see it clearly. The high-definition video played silently. It showed the harsh, fluorescent-lit hallway. It showed me walking calmly in my modest navy dress. Then, it showed Janice intercepting me. The footage captured her aggressive posture, her violent grip on my arm, and the exact, brutal moment she snatched the black uniform from the laundry cart and shoved it forcefully into my chest. The digital evidence annihilated the final, desperate shreds of their defense. It destroyed any pathetic attempt to reframe the night as a bizarre joke or an innocent mistake. Evelyn watched the video loop twice. She looked at the frozen image of Janice shoving the cheap fabric at me. Then, she looked at the real me, standing in the center of her library, still wearing that exact same apron over my clothes. What had begun 2 hours ago as a petty, calculated social humiliation designed to break my spirit had miraculously transformed. It was no longer just about a fake charity or a compromised trust fund. It had become pure, undeniable, and scientifically verifiable evidence of exactly how Janice and Lauren Hodges treated human beings. It proved, beyond any argument, how they abused and discarded anyone they believed could not elevate their social standing. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Evelyn Wexler stood up from the heavy leather chair in the library, her expression wiped of any residual familial warmth. She did not offer a closing remark to the weeping bride or the trembling mother. She simply nodded to her general counsel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. We followed her back into the blinding light of the grand ballroom. The transition from the claustrophobic, damning darkness of the private study to the glittering, champagne-soaked reality of the gala felt like crossing between two different planets. Outside, the party was oblivious to the slaughter that had just occurred. A young groomsman was standing on the grand staircase, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal flute, preparing to deliver a heartfelt toast. The string quartet had transitioned into a lively, upbeat melody. Waiters were circulating with silver trays of warm hors d'oeuvres, their faces carefully blank. Evelyn did not wait for the groomsman to speak. She walked directly to the center of the room, her presence once again parting the sea of wealthy guests like an invisible plow. The general counsel moved smoothly to the audio control podium, stationed near the band, and simply pulled the primary cable, killing the microphone and the ambient music in one swift, brutal motion. The sudden, deadening quiet caused every head in the massive hall to turn instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn announced, her voice projecting clearly across the vast, vaulted space without any need for electronic amplification. "I must ask for your immediate attention. Effective this exact moment, the engagement celebration between my grandson, Noah, and Miss Hodges is indefinitely suspended." The announcement detonated across the room with the force of a physical shockwave. A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the hundreds of assembled attendees. The guests did not know every single sordid detail of what had just transpired inside the library, but they understood the ruthless, unforgiving language of power. The matriarch of the Wexler Empire did not publicly cancel an engagement of this massive magnitude over a simple family disagreement or a minor lover's quarrel. This decision is due to serious, newly verified concerns involving gross misrepresentation and a pending, comprehensive trust-related review. Evelyn continued, her tone as cold and hard as a diamond. "I apologize for the abrupt disruption to your evening. You are welcome to stay and enjoy the hospitality, but the Wexler family will be departing immediately." The ballroom transformed instantly into a live, highly volatile market of whispers, harsh judgments, and rapidly collapsing alliances. I watched the local society columnist, who had been lingering near the dessert station, drop her champagne flute onto a cocktail table. She immediately began typing frantically on her mobile phone, sending rapid messages under the table to her editors. Major donors, the exact people Janice and Lauren had spent the entire evening desperately courting and flattering, began quietly but deliberately distancing themselves from the center of the room. They physically stepped backward, blending into the shadows, terrified of catching the collateral damage of a rapidly sinking social ship. Evelyn turned slightly, her sharp eyes finding me where I stood at the edge of the circle. I was still wearing the stiff black catering apron tightly over my modest dress. "Ms. Hodges," Evelyn said, addressing me formally in front of the entire assembly. "As the independent investigator who brought these matters to light, do you have any official statement you wish to make to this room before we conclude?" The crowd held its collective breath. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the woman they had spent the last 2 hours treating like invisible, disposable furniture. I looked at the sea of panicked, wealthy faces. I looked at Lauren, whose meticulously crafted, fraudulent fairy tale was currently burning to ash around her expensive heels. "I will only say this," I replied, keeping my voice surgical, level, and devoid of any petty gloating. "Character revealed under unequal power is still character." Tonight provided significantly more clarity regarding the ethical foundation of this proposed union than any private interview ever could have. "The audit is closed." My words hung in the chilling air. A final, ironclad verdict delivered by the hired help. Lauren could not process the reality of her total destruction. She broke away from her paralyzed mother and made a frantic, desperate appeal directly to Evelyn in front of the entire stunned crowd. "Evelyn, please, you cannot do this," Lauren cried out, reaching forward to grasp the older woman's tailored sleeve. "You know my heart. You know how much I love Noah. We can fix the paperwork. I will step down from the charity. I will do whatever you want." But the magic was gone. Earlier in the evening, her tears might have moved the wealthy patrons. Now, her performance finally felt rehearsed rather than heartfelt. The desperation was hollow and deeply unattractive. Even the most sympathetic guests standing nearby actively stepped back from her, horrified by her absolute lack of dignity. Evelyn simply looked down at Lauren's hand resting on her arm until Lauren, burning with intense shame, slowly pulled it away. Seeing that Lauren was radioactive, Noah attempted a final cowardly maneuver to salvage his own sinking reputation. He stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of defensive innocence, projecting his voice loudly so his influential friends and the board trustees could hear his defense. "Grandmother, I was blindsided by this," Noah declared, actively throwing the woman he had just promised to marry directly under the speeding bus. "Janice and Lauren lied to me. They heavily exaggerated their financial numbers to secure my support. I am a victim of their aggressive social climbing just as much as this foundation is. I will fully cooperate with the corporate restructuring." Evelyn did not even blink. She turned her freezing glare onto her grandson, stripping away his golden boy armor in front of his powerful peers. "Do not insult my intelligence, Noah," Evelyn stated loudly, ensuring the Foundation compliance consultants and the General Counsel heard every single syllable of his damnation. "Your own active effort to influence the independent investigator with $3 million in future consulting retainers to alter her final report makes you equally disqualified from any leadership role. You will report to the family office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to discuss the immediate suspension of your trust access." Noah recoiled, as if he had been physically struck across the jaw with a heavy stone. The murmurs in the crowd escalated into audible gasps. The golden heir had just been publicly stripped of his crown, his credibility destroyed by his own grandmother. In that chaotic, shifting reality, Janice's mind finally snapped. The sheer, overwhelming weight of losing the wealth, the status, and the glittering future she had lied, cheated, and stolen to secure broke her. Her manic eyes locked onto the thick black leather folder containing my printed evidence dossier, which the General Counsel had temporarily placed on a nearby marble side table. Driven by pure, unadulterated desperation and a deeply irrational belief that destroying the physical paper would somehow miraculously erase the truth, Janice lunged. She let out a guttural, animalistic noise and threw herself across the open parquet floor, her heavy beaded gown tearing as she scrambled toward the marble table. Her manicured hands clawed frantically at the air, trying to snatch my report folder before Evelyn could take it away. She never even made it close. Two highly trained, massive private security contractors in dark suits stepped seamlessly out of the crowd, They intercepted her a full 5 feet away from the table. One officer grabbed her right arm, the other secured her left, halting her forward momentum in an instant. They did not hurt her, but they held her in an unbreakable, deeply humiliating physical restraint. Janice struggled wildly against the men, her elaborate updo unraveling, her heavy makeup streaked with terrified, angry tears. She looked exactly like what she truly was, a desperate, petty grifter who had finally been caught by the house. "Let me go," Janice shrieked, her voice echoing horribly off the vaulted ceiling. "That belongs to us. You cannot do this to us." Nobody moved to help her. The wealthy donors she had spent years mimicking and worshipping simply stared at her with cold, anthropological disgust. The social execution was absolute and merciless. The general counsel picked up the leather folder, tucked it securely under his arm, and offered his arm to Evelyn Wexler. They turned and walked slowly out of the grand ballroom, the sea of elite guests parting for them one final time. The party did not end with a massive, cinematic scream or a dramatic physical altercation. It ended with something far more terrifying. It ended with elite, suffocating silence. The music was gone. The fake laughter was dead. The remaining guests simply watched the Hodges family burn to the ground without offering a single drop of water. The silence was the worst possible punishment, because everyone present in that glittering room understood that they had just watched a total, permanent social execution, and it had been conducted with undeniable facts. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, the humid, salt-heavy Florida air was sealed outside the thick, soundproof glass of the Wexler family office. The expansive boardroom was located on the 42nd floor of a sterile corporate high-rise, an environment stripped of the velvet curtains, white orchids, and intoxicating glamour of the previous night. There was no champagne to soften the brutal edges of reality here. There was only cold, filtered air and severe, inescapable consequences. The long mahogany table offered no hiding places. Around it sat Evelyn Wexler, her general counsel, 3 senior foundation trustees, and a broken Noah. He wore the exact same tailored suit he had worn to the gala, but it was hopelessly wrinkled, hanging off his broad frame like a cheap, borrowed costume. His eyes were bloodshot, and he stared blankly at a cold cup of black coffee. He was finally facing the devastating reality of his own arrogance. He had treated fundamental business ethics and institutional integrity like a disposable branding tool, and now the bill had officially come due. I took my assigned seat at the direct opposite end of the long table from the matriarch. I wore a tailored slate gray suit of my own choosing. There was no apron, there was no subservient posture. I placed my thick leather-bound final investigative dossier squarely onto the polished wood, the heavy thud echoing loudly in the quiet room. Based on the exhaustive forensic evidence presented and verified, I addressed the room, keeping my tone strictly professional and devoid of any lingering emotional static. My firm formally recommends the immediate, permanent suspension of the proposed matrimonial engagement. Furthermore, we strongly advise the immediate removal of Noah Wexler from the primary trust succession timeline and all associated leadership transition protocols. Noah flinched violently, closing his eyes, but he did not possess the energy or the leverage to argue. His polished public redemption arc, the manufactured narrative he intended to build using a fraudulent bride to regain his standing with these very trustees, was officially dead on arrival. Finally, I continued, sliding copies of the executive summary toward the 3 silent trustees. Meridian Quiet Risk recommends the initiation of a comprehensive civil recovery process. This legal action must be directly tied to the fabricated finances, the misappropriated funds, and the false fundraising claims engineered by Brightpath Girls Lab. We must aggressively mitigate any lingering institutional liability connected to the Wexler name. Evelyn did not pause to debate the merits of my findings. She did not consult her grandson or attempt to soften the blow for his sake. She accepted my recommendations in full. With 3 sharp signatures on the prepared legal documents placed before her by the General Counsel, she froze Noah's transition into executive leadership indefinitely. She then ordered a massive, outside corporate restructuring of the entire family foundation, mandating that the internal audit be completed before any future marriage-related announcements could ever proceed from anyone in the family. The civil recovery process against the Hodges family will be swift and merciless, the general counsel added, looking strictly over his reading glasses at the disgraced heir. We are dispatching a legal team to seize the BrightPath servers by noon today. Your former fiancé will be legally compelled to surrender every single financial ledger and communication record. If she resists in any capacity, we will simply hand your private donor memos directly over to the State Attorney General's office. She currently faces immense donor repayment demands, and she will face those demands alone. Noah stared at the grain of the mahogany table, his hands trembling slightly. "And my position on the executive board?" he asked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, reedy whisper. "You no longer possess one," Evelyn stated, her voice a weapon of pure, unadulterated disappointment. "You attempted to utilize a fraudulent charitable entity to launder your own prior ethical failures. When confronted with the undeniable truth, you attempted to bribe the independent investigator. You have lost the wedding, you have lost the trust, and you have lost your reputation. You will vacate your executive office by 5 o'clock this evening." The hammer fell equally hard on the other side of the city. Within exactly 2 hours of the meeting concluding, Lauren was officially served with binding legal notices. She was stripped of her fake corporate title and realized very quickly that the massive financial debts she had accumulated to build her fake social profile were now her own to bear. Janice, the ambitious architect of the entire catastrophe, found herself permanently and quietly blacklisted. She was instantly cut out of every single foundation-facing social role and country club membership she had spent the last 15 years desperately trying to secure. The invisible ironclad doors of high society slammed shut against her forever. When I finally stepped out of the freezing corporate tower and into the warm, bright morning sun, I pulled my encrypted mobile device from my leather briefcase. The screen was choked with notifications. There were over 40 missed calls and 17 frantic voicemails from my mother and sister. I listened to exactly one. It featured Janice weeping hysterically, alternating between viciously blaming me for ruining their perfect lives and begging me to utilize my immense corporate influence to quietly fix the financial mess. The very next message was from Lauren, her voice thick with panic, suddenly declaring a deep, profound sisterly love she had never once demonstrated in 34 years of life. She pleaded with me to pay off the angry donors, promising she would finally respect me if I just saved her from bankruptcy. I deleted the entire inbox with a single, decisive swipe of my thumb. I permanently blocked their numbers. I declined every pathetic, desperate attempt to make me their quiet family fixer again. I would not pay their massive debts, and I would not dry their highly manipulative tears. They had made their bed out of pure deceit, and now they had to sleep in the ashes. Instead of taking my revenge in some highly theatrical, drawn-out manner, I chose a trajectory that was infinitely sharper and far more lasting. Upon returning to my own corporate headquarters, I utilized the philanthropic arm of Meridian Quiet Risk to establish the very thing my sister had only pretended to care about. I authorized an initial endowment of $500,000 to fully fund a legitimate, highly structured technical apprenticeship program for underprivileged young women in the local area. There were no glossy Gala booklets printed for my charity. There were no rented luxury community centers or staged mentorship photographs featuring hired actors. This new program operated with 100% fully audited financial books. We employed credentialed, real software engineers as instructors, and I strictly forbade any public relations photographers or society columnists from ever entering the building. We built the exact, vital educational resource that my toxic family had merely used as a cynical prop. I walked down the sunlit, palm-lined avenue toward my waiting car, breathing in the deep, clean scent of the ocean. I wore my own clothes. I carried no uniform. I offered no apology, and I possessed no need to explain myself or my methods to anyone in the entire world. I had won. The deepest, most satisfying revenge was never about forcing my mother and sister to envy my vast wealth or my corporate power. The absolute, undeniable victory was forcing them to helplessly witness the immense, undeniable value they had ruthlessly mocked and dismissed while they commanded me to serve their drinks. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. And please let me know in the comments where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. I also invite you to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by pressing the hype button so the story in this video can be heard by many more people.